The wind was a wolf, howling across the unforgiving plains, tearing at the scarce warmth trapped within his heavy coat. Snow fell thick and relentless, erasing the world, blurring the lines between earth and sky. Caleb had tracked her for 3 days through this growing white hell, a cold, unforgiving pursuit that mirrored the chill in his own heart. A runaway bride, worth a decent sum, dead or alive, though his instructions leaned towards the latter if complications arose. Complications were the norm in this desolate land, and he was a man built for navigating them. His horse, Ghost, a beast as pale and silent as the storm itself, snorted, head low against the driving flakes. Caleb squinted through the swirling white, searching for a sign, a broken branch, a scuff in the deepening drift, anything. He'd been following faint traces, the kind only a tracker honed by necessity could discern. He expected to find her huddled and afraid, maybe attempting shelter in a shallow ravine, easy enough to corner. He did not expect the form collapsed against a jagged outcropping of rock, half buried in the snowdrift, utterly still. His hand went instinctively to the worn wood of his rifle stock. He dismounted, moving cautiously, Ghost shuffling behind him. The wind shrieked, muffling the crunch of his boots on the snow. As he drew closer, the stillness resolved into a human shape, small and bundled, but unmistakably a woman. Not huddled in fear, collapsed. He reached her, nudging the snow gently with his boot. She didn't stir. Dread, cold and sharp, pierced through his professional detachment. Had the storm claimed her already? He knelt, brushing snow from her back. She was lying on her side, facing the rock. Her cloak, once likely fine wool, was sodden and stiff with ice. Carefully, he rolled her onto her back. Her face was a mask of pain, etched deep despite the cold. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and unfocused, fixing on his face. They were a startling blue against the pallor of her skin, filled not with the expected fear of discovery, but with an agony that stole her breath. Recognition flickered, then was swallowed by a wave of more visceral pain. A low, guttural sound escaped her lips, raw and primal. Below the heavy cloak, her body was arched tight. Her hand clutched at her distended belly. Caleb's gaze dropped, comprehension slamming into him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't the simple capture he'd anticipated. This was something else entirely. A different kind of storm was raging within her, one the blizzard outside only amplified. Another cry tore from her throat, louder this time, ending in a ragged gasp. Her body trembled violently. The runaway bride was not just hiding from her past or the man hired to drag her back. She was alone, in the heart of a blizzard, giving birth. All thought of bounty, of pursuit, of the life he led vanished, replaced by the stark, immediate reality of the situation. The code of the frontier was brutal, but it wasn't without its own strange, unwritten rules. Leaving a woman, any woman, in this state, in this weather, felt like a violation of something fundamental, something deeper than the law or the promise of coin. He looked at the raw fear and agony in her eyes, the desperate, solitary battle she was fighting against her own body and the elements. The wolf wind howled, indifferent. For a long moment, Caleb remained kneeling in the snow, the blizzard swirling around them, the sounds of her struggle the only thing breaking the storm's monotone roar. He made his choice. He scooped her up carefully. She was lighter than he expected, a fragile weight against his arm. Her eyes were closed again, her face contorted. "Hold on," he muttered, his voice rough against the wind. He scanned the rock face she'd collapsed against. There was a small indentation, barely an overhang, offering minimal shelter. It wasn't enough. His gaze swept the desolate landscape, the white expanse offering no hope of a cabin or even a decent cave within reasonable distance. But there was the rock outcropping itself. He remembered seeing something on the geological survey maps, a series of small caves marked vaguely higher up in this ridge. A long shot through the storm, but their only shot. He couldn't leave her here to freeze. He couldn't leave her here to die alone in childbirth. He settled her against the rock, her head cradled awkwardly. "Gonna find shelter," he said, his voice calm despite the urgency clawing at him. "Don't. Just hold on," he doubted she heard him. Mounting Ghost, he guided the horse along the base of the ridge, straining his eyes through the blinding snow. The wind bit at his exposed skin. Minutes felt like hours. Just as despair began to set in, a darker shadow against the white face of the rock caught his eye. A narrow opening, barely visible, partially blocked by a drift. It was low, cramped, probably shallow, but it was shelter from the wind and snow. It was something. He dismounted again and hurried back to her. She was weaker now, her breathing shallow, the cries softer, interspersed with ragged gasps. "Found a place," he said, kneeling again. "Gotta move you." He couldn't be gentle about it, not entirely. He had to be quick. Lifting her again, he held her tight, shielding her face from the worst of the wind with his body. She moaned softly, a small, lost sound. He led Ghost, walking slowly, deliberately back towards the dark opening in the rock. The snow continued its relentless descent, burying the tracks behind them almost as fast as they made them. Inside, the cave was small, damp, and freezing, but blessedly out of the wind. He carefully lowered her onto the relatively flat, stony floor. He worked quickly. He needed fire immediately. He rummaged in his saddlebags for his tinderbox, precious dry kindling he always carried. He scraped away the damp surface snow just inside the cave entrance to access drier earth or rock. Finding a few stunted, wind-beaten branches caught against the rocks outside, he broke them for fuel. His hands were stiff with cold, fumbling slightly. Finally, a spark caught in the dry grass he'd pulled from his saddlebag padding. A tiny, fragile flame flickered, vulnerable in the cold air. He cupped it with his hands, feeding it slowly, carefully with the small twigs. The fire grew, casting dancing shadows on the damp cave walls. It wasn't much, but it pushed back the oppressive cold and the deeper darkness. He turned back to her. She was curled on her side, shivering violently. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and beaded with sweat despite the cold. Another contraction hit her, a silent, agonizing wave that tightened her entire body. He watched, helpless, a stranger witnessing the most intimate, brutal act of nature. His usual competence felt utterly inadequate here. He knew horses, rifles, trails, the cold mathematics of survival and pursuit. He knew nothing of this. What was her name? He didn't know. She was the runaway bride, a wanted person, a face on a poster. Now she was just a woman in terrible pain on the brink of collapse. He had no medical supplies, nothing but the rough contents of a cowboy's gear. He had to do something. He pulled off his heavy coat, folded it, and tried to slide it under her head for a makeshift pillow. He draped his saddle blanket over her. It was meager comfort against the cold stone. He needed water, hot water if possible. He had a small metal cup. He'd have to melt snow over the fire. He began scooping clean snow from just outside the cave entrance into the cup. As the snow melted and began to warm, he kept glancing at her. The sounds of her labor were becoming more frequent, more desperate. He realized with a jolt that he wasn't thinking of the bounty, or the risks, or anything beyond the immediate, overwhelming need to help her survive this. The transformation had begun, quiet and unbidden, forged in the crucible of her pain and the isolating fury of the storm. He was no longer her hunter. He was simply there. The small fire crackled, providing a meager circle of warmth and light. The damp air of the cave was thick with the smell of wet wool, wood smoke, and the raw metallic scent of her struggle. Anna. The name surfaced from the fragmented information he'd gleaned. Anna. He had a name for the woman fighting for her life on the cold stone floor. He held the cup of warm water to her lips. "Here," he said, his voice soft. "Drink." Her eyes fluttered open again, clouded with pain, but with a flicker of awareness this time. She managed a weak nod and sipped greedily. The water seemed to revive her slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. It was the first word she'd spoken. It hung in the air, fragile and unexpected. Another contraction seized her, fiercer than before. She cried out, arching her back. Caleb knelt beside her, awkward and unsure. He didn't know what to do, how to help. Just breathe, he said, the only useless advice he could think of. Her hand fumbled for something to grip. He offered his own. Her fingers, cold and surprisingly strong, latched onto his. The connection was sudden, intimate, born of necessity and shared crisis. He didn't pull away. Hours blurred into a tense, terrifying eternity. The storm outside raged unabated, a constant reminder of their isolation. Inside, the fire dwindled and needed constant feeding. Caleb tended it, melted more snow for water, his movements economical. His mind focused solely on the small, damp space and the woman within it. He saw things he never expected to see, heard sounds that were both terrifying and miraculous. Her strength, raw and elemental, fighting against exhaustion and pain.
Her vulnerability, stripped bare.
He helped her shift position, his hands tentative but firm. He wiped her brow with a damp cloth made from a piece of his own shirt. He encouraged her when she seemed to falter, his voice low and steady. Almost there, he'd murmur, having no idea if it was true. The world outside the cave, the world of bounties and pursuits and past lives, felt impossibly distant. Then a change. A different sound, sharper, more urgent. Her final cries were long and deep, ending in a ragged gasp that was not pain, but exhaustion. And then, another sound, small, wet, and impossibly fragile. The cry of a newborn baby. Silence descended, broken only by the crackling fire and the baby's small wails. Anna lay back, spent, her hand still clutching his, though her grip was slack now. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. The baby, slick and red, lay on the blanket beside her, tiny fists waving. Caleb stared, momentarily frozen. He had faced down men with guns, ridden through blizzards that froze the marrow, gone days without food or water. Nothing had prepared him for this small, utterly dependent life that had just entered the world in this freezing cave. He had to act. He remembered vague things, stories overheard, instincts born of observing the natural world. He found his knife, cleaned the blade as best he could with snow and then heat from the fire. He cut the cord, his hands shaking slightly. He wrapped the baby in a section of his saddle blanket, the softest part he could find, leaving only its face exposed. It was a girl, small and red-faced, but alive. He knelt, holding the tiny bundle awkwardly. Anna stirred, her eyes opening slowly. They found the baby, then shifted to him. A faint smile touched her lips, a fragile thing that transformed her pain-worn face. It wasn't the smile of the runaway bride. It was the smile of a mother. "A girl," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A girl," he confirmed, his own voice rough with unspoken emotion. He carefully placed the baby in her arms. Anna cradled the tiny form, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten, her gaze fixed on her daughter. In that moment, she was no longer the woman he had been tracking. She was simply a mother, protecting her young in a dangerous world. And he, the man hired to bring her back, was now the only thing standing between them and the indifferent, deadly storm outside. The cave felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a crucible where something new and unexpected had been forged. The past was the past. The blizzard had changed everything. The first day and night in the cave passed in a haze of exhaustion, fragile life, and the constant, gnawing cold. Anna was weak, but resilient. The baby, though tiny, seemed determined to survive. Caleb tended the fire, melted snow, and watched over them with a quiet intensity. He offered Anna sips of water, broke off small pieces of jerky from his meager supply for her. She ate little, her strength focused on the fragile life in her arms. Dialogue remained sparse, measured. Questions were unnecessary. The silence was heavy with shared experience, unspoken understanding. She didn't ask him if he was going to take her back. He didn't tell her his original purpose. It was as if the blizzard, the birth, had erased the lines drawn between them by the outside world. They were simply three beings huddled against the storm, bound by the sheer necessity of survival. He watched her with the baby, the way she held the small bundle, her face soft with a love that seemed capable of pushing back the cold itself. The way the baby rooted blindly against her, seeking warmth and nourishment. He saw her strength reemerge, not the defiant strength of a runaway, but the fierce, protective power of a mother. Her initial terror had been replaced by a quiet determination, a focus that was absolute. He thought about the men who had hired him, the powerful family who wanted their errant bride returned, no doubt for reasons of property or status. They wouldn't care about a newborn child, especially one born in these circumstances. His orders had been clear, ruthless. But looking at Anna and the baby girl, small and vulnerable in the flickering firelight, those orders felt distant and irrelevant. The storm outside showed no sign of breaking. The wind still howled, the snow still fell. Leaving the cave meant facing certain death for the baby, likely for Anna, and maybe even for him. Their survival depended on this fragile shelter, the dwindling fuel for the fire, and whatever meager supplies he had left. The external antagonist wasn't a pursuer or a bounty hunter anymore. It was the relentless, indifferent power of nature. Anna looked up at him then, her blue eyes clear and steady. "The men who sent you," she began, her voice stronger than before. Caleb met her gaze. There was no accusation in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. "They sent me," he confirmed, his voice low, "to bring you back." She nodded, accepting the truth. "And now?" He glanced at the baby nestled against her. The question didn't need answering in words. His continued presence, his actions, spoke louder than any explanation. He hadn't left. He was tending the fire, sharing his food, protecting them from the storm. "Now," he said, choosing his words carefully, "there's a child. Things change." It was an understatement of monumental proportions, but it was enough. Acknowledgement passed between them, a silent agreement that the terms had shifted, irrevocably. The hunter and the hunted were gone, replaced by a reluctant guardian and a resilient survivor bound by the tiny, miraculous life they had brought into this harsh world together. The future was uncertain, fraught with danger, but for this moment, in the flickering warmth of the fire, they had survived. And in that survival, a fragile, unexpected partnership had been forged. The snow kept falling, but inside the cave, a different kind of warmth had begun to grow. Days bled into a timeless cycle of fire tending, melting snow, and quiet observation. The storm outside eventually relented, leaving behind a landscape transformed, deep drifts, silence, and a chilling, relentless cold. Leaving was still impossible. They waited, conserved resources, and simply existed, three lives bound together by the shared ordeal. Anna, fueled by the fierce instinct of motherhood, regained strength surprisingly quickly. She nursed the baby, cared for her with a tenderness that was stark against the harsh surroundings. Caleb watched, sometimes from the entrance, sometimes from his place near the fire, always aware, always vigilant. He taught her how to ration the remaining jerky, how to identify which snow was cleanest to melt. Small, practical lessons born of necessity. She, in turn, taught him something about resilience, about the quiet, fierce power that lay beneath vulnerability. The baby had no name yet. They referred to her simply as the baby, a tiny, nameless miracle in a world that had little room for them. But in Anna's eyes, when she looked at her daughter, there was a universe of hope and fierce love. One morning, the sky outside the cave entrance was a pale, washed-out blue, the sun a weak, distant disk. The storm had broken. The silence of the snow-covered world was profound, broken only by the occasional shift of snow or the distant cry of a hawk. It was time to leave. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. What now? The bounty on Anna's head hadn't vanished with the snow. The men who wanted her back were still out there, and he was still technically the man hired to bring her in. Anna looked at him, her gaze steady. There was no plea, no fear. Only a quiet strength that hadn't been there before the blizzard, before the birth. She held the baby wrapped tight in the salvaged saddle blanket. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice calm. He looked at her, at the baby, then out at the vast, unforgiving landscape. He thought of the life he'd led, the trails he'd ridden, the cold logic that had governed his actions. Felt alien now. The cave, this ordeal, had stripped something away and built something new in its place. He wasn't just a bounty hunter anymore. He was the man who had helped bring this child into the world, who had shielded them from the storm. "They'll be looking," he said, stating the obvious truth. "But maybe not here. Not after this." The blizzard had been a wall, hiding them, changing the game. He didn't say, "I won't take you back." He didn't need to. His presence beside them, his preparation to face the world with them, was the answer. The bounty was forfeit. His old life was, in a way, over. A new, uncertain path lay ahead. He stood, pulling on his heavy coat. "We travel light," he said. "Head west. Find a small town. Somewhere quiet." It wasn't a plan. Not a detailed one. But it was a direction. A shared goal. Anna nodded. A small, grateful smile touching her lips. She struggled to her feet, holding the baby close. She was still weak, but she moved with a purpose, a newfound strength rooted in protecting her child. He gathered their meager belongings, his rifle, their depleted supplies, the few items salvaged from her pack. He helped her mount Ghost, settling her carefully in the saddle with the baby. He would walk, leading the horse. It would be slow, difficult, dangerous. As they emerged from the cave into the blinding white light of the snow-covered world, the cold air biting at their faces, Caleb looked back at the small opening in the rock. A temporary refuge, a silent witness to a transformation. He closed his mind to the past, to the men who might still be searching, to the life he was leaving behind. His focus was ahead, on the vast, white unknown, and on the two fragile lives depending on him. The runaway bride and the wanted cowboy. Their paths had crossed in the worst possible circumstances, and in the fire and fury of a blizzard and a birth, they had been remade. They stepped out into the silent, glittering expanse, not as pursuer and pursued, but as unlikely companions facing a perilous future together. Resilience was not the absence of fear, he realized, but the act of moving forward through it, one careful step at a time, bound by unexpected loyalty and the quiet dignity forged in shared hardship. The snow stretched endlessly before them, a stark, beautiful, dangerous path. But they would walk it together.